Salem, a name that still sends chills, sparks curiosity, and maybe inspires some questionable Halloween cosplay. But back in 1692, Salem had none of today's kitsch. It was a place where a weird look could land you in serious trouble. And we're not talking about cancel culture, we're talking about the gallows. What happened there remains one of the most bizarre episodes in American history. A small village, full of tension, extreme religion, and a few girls who triggered chaos beyond imagination. But how did it escalate to over 200 accusations of witchcraft, 19 executions, and an entire community in full-blown panic? Well, today on X Theories we're putting on our black hats, pointy ones of course, and diving into a dark chapter of history. Before we imagine Salem as a haunted town filled with thick fog, women in black cloaks and owls shaking their heads disapprovingly, let's look at the reality. Salem, Massachusetts in 1692 was far from anything exotic or mystical. It was a small Puritan settlement, cold, strict, and honestly kinda boring. The kind of place where fun meant going to church 3 times a day. Saturdays were for spiritual prep, Sundays 6 hours of sermons, Mondays post-Sunday guilt. Puritans were extremely devout Protestants who wanted to live by the Bible, the hardcore edition. They believed the world was a battlefield between God and Satan, and people were just pawns stuck in the middle. Any illness, failed crops, or a neighbor sneezing weirdly, that was a clear sign the devil was at work. Oh, and women, they were seen as more vulnerable to sin. So if you were a woman, single, independent, or just enjoyed reading, suspicious. Witch for sure, someone saw her smiling for no reason. Besides the ultra-strict religious beliefs, Salem was also a politically and economically tense place. The town was split in two. Salem Town, the commercial center with wealthier folks, and Salem Village, an agricultural area, more conservative and with a bit of an inferiority complex. This divide created constant jealousy, gossip, and tension. Now throw in some spicy ingredients. A recent famine, fear of Native American attacks, a community basically living in isolation, ongoing land and inheritance disputes between families. And what do you get? A perfect cocktail for mass paranoia. To top it off, medicine back then was, let's just say, experimental. If you had seizures or headaches, they'd quickly diagnose you with evil influence. If you were lucky, maybe you'd get some frog blood as treatment. There were no psychologists, no antivirals, but there was the strong belief that Satan was lurking just around the corner, eyeing you. So, in 1692, any strange behavior, from bad dreams to a grumpy neighbor, could be seen as a sign that the witches are working. And in a village already full of bottled-up frustrations, all it needed was a spark. And that spark came from a few little girls. It all began, seemingly trivial, on a cold day in January 1692, at the house of Reverend Samuel Parris in Salem Village. And if you have a feeling that a reverend, some children, and a paranoid community is the perfect recipe for a scandal, you're right. Reverend Parris had a daughter, Betty, aged 9, and a niece, Abigail Williams, aged 11. 2 normal little girls for those times. They went to church, memorized the Bible, and apparently didn't have TikTok. So, out of boredom or curiosity, they started playing a game of fortune-telling with the help of a Caribbean slave, Tituba. She told them stories of magic, spirits, and rituals, the kind of tales that today would sell as audiobooks on Spotify. But back then, it was enough to raise suspicions and light the fuse. Shortly after these games, the girls began displaying bizarre behaviors. They screamed for no reason, contorted, threw themselves on the ground, had hallucinations, and spoke nonsense. And no, this wasn't some internet challenge. It was real, and everyone in the village watched, stunned. The local doctor, after ruling out all known diseases, probably about 2, gave the final verdict: it's the devil's work. And that was it. Suddenly it wasn't about sick or scared children anymore. It was demonic possession, and Salem, already on edge, went into full alert mode. Under pressure from adults, the girls were asked, or rather pressed to say, "Who cursed you? Who did this to you?" And here comes the interesting part. Instead of saying "we don't know" or "we were pretending," they started pointing fingers. The first accused Tituba, of course, a foreigner, a slave, a storyteller of witchcraft, the perfect profile for a witch in the eyes of the Puritans. But they didn't stop there. 2 more women followed. Sarah Good, a beggar known in the village, considered strange because she talked to herself. And Sarah Osborne, a woman who didn't go to church much and lived by her own rules. All 3 had one thing in common: they were marginalized, different, and therefore dangerous. So they were arrested on the spot, and from here begins a dangerous spiral. Because once the accusations were taken seriously, and the girls were treated like victims attacked by witches, the hysteria grew rapidly. More children began to display similar symptoms. Some adults joined in, either out of sincere belief or opportunism. Soon, any strange gesture, any unusual dream or misunderstanding between neighbors could become grounds for an accusation. And what happens when an entire society begins to believe the devil is among them? Well, chaos. And what follows is even stranger. Like a crazy domino game, where each fallen piece points a finger at someone else. Once someone was accused, a vicious circle began. Either you confess and rat someone else out, or we'll see you at the gallows. In short, Salem became a game of Among Us on hard mode. Everyone suspected everyone lied, everyone tried to appear innocent, and no one was safe. At first it was Tituba, then Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne, but the accusations weren't going to stop there. Think about it. It was a small, isolated community where everyone knew everything about everyone. The kind of place where if you sneeze too loudly, by evening it's rumored you performed a demonic ritual in the woods. Now imagine what happens when a few girls start screaming that your neighbor sent spirits to torture them. Each day brought a new accused. And more often people began accusing their own neighbors, fellow churchgoers, even relatives. Not because they had evidence, but because it was safer to point a finger than to be the one accused. In some cases, people used their accusations as bargaining chips. You have a problem with that old man next to you who doesn't want to sell you his land? Guess what? He's a witch. That widow who's stealing your customers at the market? Done. She sold her soul to the devil. And no, I'm not joking. Some accusations were based on dreams, nightmares, or a strange glance. The judges, instead of stopping the madness, fueled it. They accepted testimonies that today would seem like they were written by a horror writer drunk at 3 in the morning. To be fair, they had their own fears. Maybe if they rejected an accusation, they'd be next on the list. When we think of Salem, it's easy to believe that it was all just a story about superstitions and the devil. But in reality, it was a perfect lesson on how the human mind works, when cornered by fear and fueled with a little paranoia and a lot of religion. The phenomenon that took over Salem is called collective hysteria. It's the moment when an entire community begins to blindly believe in a danger, real or imagined, and logic completely evaporates. In such a context, even the most absurd things become evidence. You have a headache? Witch. Your dress ripped? Witch. You tripped over your own feet? Someone cast a curse on you. Every trivial event became a clue in an imaginary satanic plot. But why does this work? Because in the face of uncertainty, the human mind looks for clear explanations, even if they are completely wrong. And if everyone around you believes you are in danger, you start to feel it too. It's like an emotional disease passed through word of mouth, a kind of broken telephone but with trauma and hangings. And there's more. In Salem, religion was the law, as I mentioned before. There was no separation between faith and justice. Everything was black or white, good or evil, and if someone suffered, it was because the devil was present. In such a society, the idea of witchcraft wasn't just a horror story, it was a legal reality. Moreover, even those who were skeptical became targets. If you didn't believe the accusations, it meant you were protecting witches. And from there, it was just one step to being accused yourself. Within a few months, Salem had become a completely irrational society, where even silence could be suspicious. People no longer trusted their relatives or friends. The words devil, pact, and magic were heard more often than good morning. Hysteria was no longer just a reaction to fear, it had become a way of life. And perhaps the saddest part, many of the accused ended up confessing to something they hadn't done, just to save their lives. But the bitter irony? Those who refused to lie were considered guilty. Because, you see, if you don't confess, you're hiding something. At first everything seemed like a good plan. The witches were being eliminated, the community was cleansed, and everyone felt like biblical heroes. But as expected, paranoia has no brakes. At some point, among the accused appeared people with powerful names. Respected priests, wives of judges, relatives of governors. So, we're no longer talking about that lonely widow on the edge of town who talks to her cat, but the local elite. And suddenly, everyone started paying a little more attention to what was happening. Because it's easy to support a system where only the others suffer, but when the system starts hunting you down with a torch and a pyre ready, it doesn't seem as fun anymore. One of the cases that shook public confidence was that of Reverend George Burroughs, former pastor of the Salem community. He was accused of being the leader of a satanic conspiracy, of course, and was even condemned. But before he was executed, he flawlessly recited the Lord's Prayer, something believed to be impossible for a witch to do. Many witnesses started to have doubts, but the court, no stress, the execution goes ahead. Still, in some people's minds, a light bulb went off. If this man wasn't a witch, how many others had died for nothing? The turning point came when Governor William Phipps, yes, the man with the final word, realized that his own wife was suspected. He quickly realized that the witch hunt had become a hand swinging an axe blindly. His reaction something like, "All right, stop the game. We had fun, we panicked, we burned what needed to be burned. Now let's calm down." He dissolved the special court, banned the use of spectral evidence, and ordered the release of those still in prison. In 1693, the hysteria officially ended. But not because people realized witches didn't exist, but because the fire they had started began to reach their own feet. Those who died were never fully rehabilitated in their lifetime. Many years later, some judges admitted they had made mistakes. Too late, too little. One even publicly apologized. But you know how it is. You can't hit Ctrl+Z on an execution. That was the story of the Salem witches. A dark but also ridiculous episode in history. If you found it interesting, leave a like, subscribe, and let us know in the comments. What would you have done if you were there in 1692? Would you have hidden, or would you be casting spells to start your own only broom?